It was 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and my husband, Mark, was sitting at the head of our ridiculously long oak dining table like he was the mafia godfather. Beside him sat his slick lawyer, Mr. Henderson, with a mustache that looked like it had just been greased with bacon fat. On the table, sitting alone between a wilted peony arrangement Mark couldn't be bothered to replace, was a thick stack of papers. Divorce papers. "Sign it, Sarah," Mark said, not even looking up from his phone. He was texting someone, and the little smirk rippling across his face told me exactly who it was. Amber, his 22-year-old assistant, the one he thought I had no idea existed. "I'm being very generous. 2 grand a month for 2 years. Enough for you to rent a little apartment and, I don't know, learn how to be independent?" Mr. Henderson pushed up his glasses, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Sarah, given that you've been unemployed for 5 years and have made no financial contribution to the marital assets, my client is offering a goodwill figure. If this goes to court, you could walk away with nothing." I looked down at my flour-dusted loungewear, then at Mark's perfectly pressed Armani suit. In their eyes, I was the poster child for failure, a 32-year-old housewife, hair a mess, being discarded for being outdated and boring. Mark let out a sigh, putting on a fake pity voice. "Don't make this hard, babe. You know you can't go up against me. You don't even know how to pay the electric bill online if I don't show you. Take the money and keep whatever dignity you have left." I picked up the pen, but instead of signing, I tapped the tip lightly against the table in the rhythm of a song Mark absolutely hated. "You're right, Mark," I said, so calmly it made Mr. Henderson frown. "I've been at home for 5 years. 5 years is a long time." I reached under my chair and pulled out a glossy black leather briefcase I'd hidden there since that morning. I set it on the table, and the heavy thud drowned out the hum of the AC. "But before we talk about who supported who," I said as I popped the locks, "we need to talk about what the word unemployed actually means. Let me rewind for a second so you understand why this moment was so sweet. 5 years earlier, Mark had been promoted to regional sales director. He came home with a bottle of champagne and a demand: "Quit your job." Back then, I was an operations manager at a logistics company. I made about what he did, and my income was steadier because his commissions swung up and down. But Mark was obsessed with the picture-perfect American family he saw on Instagram. He wanted a wife waiting at the door in a clean apron, the smell of beef stew in the air, and a house without a speck of dust. He wanted image. "I'll take care of everything," he swore, squeezing my hands. "I want you to rest. You've been working too hard. Let me be the provider. That's a man's responsibility." Because I loved him, and maybe because I was a little stupid when I was younger, I agreed. But Mark forgot one basic thing about me. I'm not someone who can sit still. My brain is wired to optimize, to build, to make money. 6 months after I quit, I was going out of my mind watching endless TV dramas. Mark, meanwhile, started changing. He started controlling spending. "How did you spend $200 at the grocery store? Why do you need a new dress? You don't even go anywhere." In drunken fights, he started calling me a freeloader, even though he was the one who begged me to stay home. That's when I decided I would never hold my hand out to him for money again, but I also wouldn't let him know. I started Velvet and Stone, an e-commerce brand specializing in high-end handmade home decor. I used every old logistics skill I had to source low-cost supply, build an automated dropshipping system, and run Facebook ads targeted at the exact kind of wealthy show-off men my husband was. When Mark came home from work and saw me cooking, he thought I'd spent all day mopping floors. The truth? While the lamb ribs were roasting in the oven, I was closing a $50,000 order with a boutique hotel in Dubai on an iPad hidden in a kitchen cabinet. While he mocked me as technologically outdated because I pretended I didn't know how to set up Netflix, I was optimizing SEO and managing a team of 15 remote employees on Slack under the anonymous name S.J. Miller. The higher Mark climbed, the worse he got. He bought a new car, designer clothes, and started taking more frequent, long business trips. He cut my household budget to funnel money to his mistress, lying that the company was struggling. I didn't say a word. I quietly moved my profits into separate investment accounts, buying real estate under the name of a holding company I set up overseas. Back to the dining table. Mark stared at my briefcase with curiosity mixed with disgust. What's that? Another recipe binder or one of your pathetic little grocery budget plans? I smiled, a sharp, cold smile I hadn't used in 5 years while I played the obedient wife. No, Mark. This is why you're about to regret not reading what you signed 3 years ago. I pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper, sealed in a clear plastic sleeve. Remember that night you were drunk and bragging about how you were about to become vice president? You made me sign a statement saying assets created from each person's separate work belong solely to that person, to protect your future stock from this freeloading wife. Mark's face flickered. So what? That was to protect my money from your greed. Exactly, I said, sliding the paper toward Mr. Henderson. The lawyer snatched it up, his eyes scanning the lines, and I watched sweat bead along his forehead. But you were too arrogant to read Addendum Clause 4, and more importantly, you forgot what separate work really means. I pulled out another thick stack of financial statements and dropped them on the table. Across the top, in bold, 2025 Financial Report, V&S Group, total revenue $4.5 million. Mark, do you think you're divorcing an unemployed housewife? I stood, bracing both hands on the table, staring straight into the eyes of a traitor whose pupils were widening in horror. You're divorcing the CEO of one of the largest online furniture suppliers on the East Coast. And thanks to that stupid document you forced me to sign to protect your spare change, every penny of this is mine. 100%. But that's not even the worst part, I whispered, leaning in as Mark's face went from red to paper white. If you want to see the face of a man realizing he just threw away a diamond to pick up a pebble, hit subscribe right now, because the next part is the downfall you've been waiting for. To understand why I'm sitting here with a winner's smile, you have to understand how Mark changed. People like to say money doesn't change you, it just reveals who you really are. With Mark, the mask fell the day he got promoted to vice president of sales 3 years ago. Before that, he was just a slightly patriarchal husband. After that day, he became a full-blown narcissistic monster. The shift started with little things. He began complaining my cooking was not classy enough compared to the 5-star restaurants where he entertained clients. He stopped asking, "How was your day?" and replaced it with, "Where's my blue dress shirt? How are you home all day and still can't iron one shirt?" But the peak humiliation came at last year's company Christmas party. Mark insisted I come, not because he wanted me there, but because his CEO cared about family values. I wore my nicest dress, an old silk one from back when I still worked. At the party, when he introduced me to partners, Mark didn't say, "This is Sarah, my wife." He wrapped an arm around my waist, squeezing in a possessive way that actually hurt, and joked, "This is Sarah, my Minister of the Interior. She's living proof that women are happiest when they don't have to think about numbers. They just have to think about what's for dinner tonight." All the men laughed. Heat rushed into my face, but I didn't say anything. I just smiled. The corporate smile I'd practiced in the mirror thousands of times. Right then, I saw Mark's eyes slide past my shoulder and lock onto a young woman in a blazing red dress in the corner. It was Amber, the new intern. That look wasn't a boss looking at an employee. That was a predator eyeing fresh meat. That night, when we got home, Mark tossed a stack of papers at me. It was the separate property agreement I mentioned in part 1. Sign it, he slurred, drunk. I'm about to make a lot of money, Sarah, and I don't want risk. You don't earn anything, so you don't get to claim my shares if something bad happens. He thought he was protecting his kingdom from me. His arrogance blinded him. He'd downloaded a contract template online, tweaked it lazily to favor himself, but he was too lazy to remove a standard clause in Section 4.2. Any income arising from independently operated business projects, not using marital funds, shall belong solely to the person who created it. He thought I only knew how to bake. He had no idea my independent business project was already pulling in $10,000 a month. I picked up the pen, made my hand shake, let my eyes fill with tears to feed his ego. If this makes you feel safe, Mark, I'll sign. I signed my name. And the moment the pen lifted off the paper, my love for him officially died. In its place, a new project was born. In my head, I codenamed it Project Icarus, named after the man who flew too close to the sun and burned. My strategy was simple. Silence is gold and data is diamonds. I didn't confront him. I didn't go through his phone at midnight. That stuff was too basic and too easy to catch. Instead, I used the skill set of a former logistics operations manager. Mark started traveling more. Miami this weekend to meet a client, he'd say. Okay, be careful, I'd reply, still folding his clothes. The second he left, I'd open my laptop. Not for Netflix, for the family iCloud account. Mark, the self-proclaimed tech genius, had synced to my iPad. So you can see cat photos. He forgot to turn off syncing for significant locations and Uber trip history. I built a detailed Excel spreadsheet with columns: date, time, claimed location, actual location, amount spent, suspected companion. March, an $800 bill at Le Bernardin for two. Mark said he was dining with a difficult old partner, but the electronic receipt, sent to our shared email because he forgot to log out, listed a sweet rose wine and a heart-shaped chocolate dessert. What kind of old partner orders that? May, a Tiffany & Co. Receipt for $3,500, a diamond bracelet. My birthday was the next week. Mark gave me a high-powered blender. So kitchen work is easier for you, he said like he was doing me a favor. I smiled brightly and thanked him. Then I photographed the blender, pasted it into my Excel file next to the line Tiffany bracelet, amber, and highlighted that row in red. But the real weapon, the one that would cost Mark not just his wife, but his career, came from a coincidence. Because Mark underestimated my intelligence, he often left his company laptop at home unlocked, or asked me to type a few reports when he was feeling lazy. Just enter these numbers, don't ask questions, you won't understand. He'd order me around like an unpaid secretary. And he was right. I didn't understand why he was that stupid. While helping him with data entry, I noticed irregularities, fake entertainment expenses, phony consulting contracts with shell companies whose registered address matched his cousin's apartment. Mark wasn't just cheating, he was siphoning company money to fund his fake luxury life and his young girlfriend. I didn't copy the data immediately because I was afraid of leaving access traces. Instead, I used a tiny hidden camera, something that sold extremely well on my online shop, mounted in the home office, recording him manipulating figures, and most importantly, recording him calling Amber to brag that he'd just gutted another 10 grand from those idiots at the company. For 2 years, I played the blind, mute wife. Every time he called me useless, I moved another $50,000 of business profit into a secret fund in Switzerland. Every time he went on a business trip with Amber, I added to the 200-page legal file I'd built. I waited for a fatal mistake. And last week, it arrived. Mark was flagged for an internal audit. Panicking, he decided to divorce me quickly so he could hide assets and, if needed, pin the blame on me. He thought I was the weakest link, the easy lamb to sacrifice. Back in the room, Mark was staring at my company's financial report, his hands shaking. How did you get the capital for this? Mark stammered, his voice cracking. You stole my money, didn't you? You must have stolen grocery money to start it. I burst out laughing, a loud, satisfying laugh that echoed through the room. Oh, Mark, you still don't get it, I said, reaching into the briefcase again. I don't need your spare change, but it looks like you really need money. Because, from what I know, the auditors will be knocking on your office door at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I pulled out a bright red USB drive. And what's on here? I held the USB up in front of the lawyer, now sweating through his collar. Isn't just proof of an affair. What's on here is a one-way ticket that lands you in prison, Mark. Mark's face shifted from white to a sick gray. You think this is where he dropped to his knees and begged? No. Men like Mark don't surrender that easily. He was about to launch his final counterattack, the dirtiest one he and his lawyer had prepared. But they didn't know I'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Mark lunged across the table, his rough fingers snatching the red USB. A glass of water tipped over, spreading across the expensive oak tabletop. He clutched the USB like it had just saved his life, breathing hard, eyes bloodshot. You think you're so smart? Mark snarled, dropping the polished act completely. Secret recordings are illegal. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy. That USB is garbage in court. Mr. Henderson quickly recovered his fake composure and straightened his tie. Ms. Sarah, my client is correct. In this state, recordings without the consent of both parties are inadmissible. And besides, he smirked, the smile of a man who believes he holds the rules in the palm of his hand. About your company, Velvet and Stone. You started it during the marriage. No matter how you hid it, under community property law, Mark still has a right to 50%. You just handed yourself to us. Thank you for disclosing the asset. Mark laughed out loud, the crisp laugh of relief. Hear that, Sarah? You worked your ass off for 5 years, and in the end you just made me rich. Thanks, babe, for the huge unemployment payout. Now give me the passwords and get out of my house. I looked at the two men gloating in front of me. A wave of pity rose in my chest. They truly had no idea who they were dealing with. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice as gentle as if I were speaking to a slow child. You're a divorce attorney, right? Then you must be very good at reading. I flipped the separate property agreement to page 12. Yes, community property applies to most couples, I said, sliding my long finger to a tiny paragraph at the bottom of the page, unless they've signed away that right. Mark, can you read Clause 4.2 out loud? Mark squinted and mumbled through it. Any assets, shares, or profits arising from business projects established by one party, using separate funds and without management participation by the other party, shall be considered the absolute and permanent separate property, not subject to division upon divorce. His voice got quieter on the last words. And this, I said, pulling yet another file out of my magic briefcase, is proof of the money trail. I started Velvet and Stone with $5,000 from my grandmother's inheritance, an account I never mixed into marital assets. I worked on the laptop I bought in college. I paid electricity and internet separately out of the first month's profit. Mark, you never put in a dime, an idea, or even a word of encouragement. You have zero claim to my $4.5 million empire. Mark's face went from red to a bruised purple. But Mr. Henderson wasn't done. He slammed his hand on the table. Fine, let's say you keep your company, but don't think you can extort Mark with that illegal recording on the USB. We'll countersue you for blackmail. I laughed, leaned back in my chair, and folded my arms. Who said I'm extorting anyone? And who said it's an illegal recording? I pointed at the ceiling, at a tiny black dot hidden near the smoke detector. That's a home security camera installed openly to protect assets. Mark signed the contract for that security service 3 years ago. Remember, Mark? You were afraid the housekeeper would steal your wine. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze razor sharp. That contract includes a clause. The homeowner acknowledges that all audio and video recorded in common living areas is lawful and belongs to the contract holder. And guess who the contract holder is? Me, because you were too lazy to fill out paperwork. I took the USB back from Mark's loosening, trembling hand. Besides, Mark, the issue isn't just you sleeping with Amber or trash-talking your CEO. The issue is what you've been doing with your company's accounting. I opened my iPad and turned the screen toward them. On it was a complex cash flow chart I'd reconstructed from the data on Mark's computer. That consulting company, Blue Sky, you're sending $15,000 a month to? The registered address is your cousin's warehouse in New Jersey. That $20,000 client entertainment expense in Las Vegas? At that time, you were at a resort with Amber, and I have GPS location data proving you never met a single client. Mark collapsed into his chair like someone had pulled his spine out. What? What are you going to do? He whispered, his voice dry. I ran a small calculation, I said, my voice flat. The total amount you've embezzled over the last 3 years is about $450,000. In this state, that's a second-degree felony. You're looking at least 5 to 10 years in prison. Mr. Henderson hurriedly stuffed papers into his briefcase. Mark, I think this is outside the scope of my representation. I'm a divorce attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer. And I don't want to be involved with evidence of a crime. Excuse me. Stop! Mark yelled, but the lawyer was already out the door, leaving his golden client stranded. Now it was just me and my husband. The room was so quiet I could hear the AC humming. Mark looked at me, his expression shifting from rage to pleading. He reached for his last weapon, the feelings play narcissists use when they're backed into a corner. Sarah? Mark stretched his hand across the table, trying to grab mine, eyes watery. A very good performance. I'll give him that. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Work pressure made me lose it. But I did everything for our family. I wanted to make money to take care of you. Are you really going to let your husband go to prison? We're married, Sarah. Remember the early days? Don't touch me. I pulled my hand back like I'd touched boiling water. You're right. We're still married on paper. I stood, walked around the table, and stopped beside his chair. I leaned down and whispered into his ear. The expensive cologne that used to impress me now made me nauseous. And that's why I have an offer for you. One last chance. I placed a new document on the table. Just 2 pages. You have 60 seconds to decide your fate, Mark. The clock starts counting down. Right now. Mark stared at the thin 2-page document in front of him, sweat dripping down and smearing the ink. This wasn't a typical divorce settlement. This was an unconditional surrender. You're kidding, right? Mark looked up, his voice hissing through his teeth. You want me to walk away with nothing? This house, my car, all the furniture? You want to take it all? Read it carefully, Mark, I said, calmly taking a sip of water, enjoying the tremor in his voice. I'm not taking everything. I'm very fair. You get to keep the BMW X5. A flicker of hope lit his eyes. But, I continued, my tone sharp as a razor, you also get to keep every debt attached to it, and the $85,000 in credit card debt you ran up buying handbags for Amber, plus the second mortgage you secretly took out to cover last month's stock losses. I know everything, Mark. You're not a millionaire like you hallucinate. You're a broke man living on borrowed money. Mark slammed his hands on the table and stood up, his face blazing red from being exposed. I'm not signing. I'd rather go to court and let the judge split this pile of debt in half than let you laugh in my face. Fine, I shrugged, reaching for my iPad. Then we go with Plan B. I opened the email app. On the screen was a drafted message already written. To Ethics Office and Board of Directors, Global Tech Corporation. Subject, Urgent Report, Financial Fraud and Embezzlement, VP Mark D. Attachment, Evidence of Participation, Mark 2023-2025. Zip, 4.5 GB. My finger hovered over the blue send button. Mark, you have exactly 60 seconds. My voice was ice now, with none of the emotion of a former wife. If you sign this paper, you waive ownership of the house, you take all personal debts, you don't get 1 cent of spousal support from me, and you leave here immediately. In exchange, this USB will be destroyed, and this email will never be sent. You'll lose your wife, lose your house, but you keep your job and your freedom. But if you don't sign, I tapped my nail lightly against the iPad screen. I hit send. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, you're fired. At 10 a.m., economic crimes officers show up to cuff you. You'll lose everything: your reputation, your career, your freedom, and of course, your precious Amber won't stick around to visit a bankrupt inmate. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick. Tock. 50 seconds, I announced. Mark stared at the send button. He was calculating. I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I keep my word. And most importantly, he was a coward. He loved himself more than anything. He'd rather lose property than sit in prison and lose the shiny vice president title he used to impress people. You're evil, Mark groaned, his trembling hand closing around the pen. 30 seconds, I reminded him, eyes still locked on the iPad screen. I supported you for 5 years. I gave you a roof. He muttered curses as he pressed pen to paper. His face twisted with pain, like each signature was a knife cutting into his skin. 10 seconds, I counted down. Mark scribbled his name on the final line. He threw the pen onto the floor and exhaled like a wounded animal. There, I signed. Happy now? He screamed. Now delete that damn email. I smiled, a real bright smile. I tapped delete draft in front of him, then picked up the 2-page surrender agreement with his signature. I checked every stroke carefully. Perfect. Legal. Irreversible. Good, I said. Now get out of my house. Your house? Mark sneered, trying to salvage the last shred of pride. Fine, I'm leaving. I'll come get my stuff this weekend. No, Mark. I stood and walked to the front door and swung it wide open. You misunderstood. You leave right now. Your clothes were packed into black trash bags and left on the porch this morning. Amber is waiting for you outside the gate. I texted her to come pick you up. Mark froze. What? You... Out, I said. Not loud, just with enough force to make him step back. Mark looked around the house one last time. The house he once thought he ruled. Now he was an uninvited guest getting thrown out. He grabbed the BMW keys off the table and shuffled toward the door. As he passed me, I leaned in and delivered the final line, the sweetest punishment. Oh, Mark, one more thing. That strategic partner company you signed an exclusive contract with last month? V&S Supply? He stopped and turned back, confused. That's a subsidiary of Velvet and Stone. I winked. I'm the one who approved that contract. You just committed to buying my materials at 20% above market. Thanks for being a loyal customer. Ex-husband. You'll be working your ass off to pay me for the next 3 years. Mark's face twisted. That was the moment he realized he didn't just lose. He'd been played, brutally, on his own field. He couldn't say a word. He turned and ran for the car like a dog with its tail between its legs. I slammed the door shut, The bang echoed like a judge's gavel declaring the case closed. I leaned against the door and took a deep breath. Even the air inside the house felt different. It no longer smelled like oppression and submission and fake cologne. It smelled like freedom, and like $4.5 million that belonged entirely to me. But the story doesn't end here. People say, a gentleman can wait 10 years to take revenge. But for me, karma moved a lot faster. Let's see what Mark and his muse, Amber, are doing a year later. 14 months. Long enough for a toddler to learn to walk, long enough for the earth to circle the sun once, and long enough to turn an unemployed housewife into a modern entrepreneur cover story. I was sitting in my glass corner office overlooking Midtown Manhattan. My desk no longer held cooking recipes or crumpled utility bills. Instead, it held an Innovative Leader of the Year award and a $12 million merger contract I signed this morning with a European retail group. After I threw Mark out, my life snapped back like a spring that had been compressed too long. Velvet and Stone didn't just survive, it exploded. I used my new freedom to work 16 hours a day, not because I was forced to, but because I loved it. I hired more staff, expanded warehouse space, and bought back the very house Mark once threatened to kick me out of. This time, the deed had only my name on it. And Mark? Just as I predicted, my parting gift, that overpriced supply contract with V&S Supply, worked like slow poison. In his desperate attempt to prove himself after the divorce, Mark didn't dare cancel the contract. The result was his sales division bleeding budget month after month. 6 months after we went to court, Mark was fired for poor management performance. And Amber? That precious little assistant? The moment Mark's credit card got declined at a Gucci store, her true love evaporated right along with it. I heard she's currently sleeping with Mark's former boss, the 60-year-old man who signed Mark's termination letter. A perfectly closed loop of karma. But the sweetest moment wasn't hearing rumors. It was seeing it with my own eyes. Yesterday evening, it was pouring rain. I'd just finished a charity fundraiser at the Ritz-Carlton. My Mercedes was in for service, so I decided to call a premium rideshare home. The app said my driver was arriving. A car pulled up, but it wasn't the sleek black sedan I expected. It was an older, scratched-up car. Like the driver had registered a basic vehicle and the app glitched, or I'd accidentally booked the wrong tier. The window rolled down, and there, looking shabby in a t-shirt with a yellowed collar and scruffy stubble, was Mark, my ex-husband, the once arrogant vice president. Our eyes met through the rain. I watched his pupils widen in shock, then tighten with shame. He looked at my $5,000 evening gown, at my Louboutin heels without a speck of dust, then down at the worn steering wheel in his old car. "Sarah," he blurted, his voice rough. "Is that you?" I didn't answer right away. I smiled, the smile of a winner with mercy. I opened the door and got into the back seat, not the front. The distance between us now wasn't just one row of seats. It was an entire social class. "Hi, Mark," I said, eyes on my phone. "Take me to the old address. You still remember the way, right?" Mark fumbled the ignition. The whole ride he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I knew he was fighting with himself. Male pride wrestling with the desperation of poverty. In the end, desperation won. I heard you're doing really well," Mark started, his voice trembling. "I saw you in the magazine. Congratulations." "Thanks," I said, flat. "Sarah," Mark cleared his throat. "I'm going through a rough patch. Amber. She scammed me. She took all my savings and ran. I'm trying to start over. But it's so hard. You know, the job market is brutal now." He paused, waiting for sympathy. When I stayed silent, he continued, his tone turning into pleading. "Do you need a warehouse manager? Or a private driver?" I know I was wrong, but I really have skills. We used to be married. You can't help me a little? The car stopped in front of my mansion gate, the home he once thought would be his. The automatic gate opened, revealing a perfectly landscaped garden I'd paid to rebuild. I stepped out, the night wind lifting my skirt. I turned back and looked at the man hunched in the cramped driver's seat. "Mark," I said softly, "do you remember what you used to say to me? You said women are happiest when they don't have to think about numbers, they just stay home and keep house." Mark's face flushed. "I'm helping you," I continued. "By not hiring you, I'm teaching you the most valuable lesson in independence, the one you forced me to learn. You said you'd take care of it, right? Then take care of yourself." I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my wallet. "No change." I dropped it through the window. It floated down onto his lap. "Consider it a tip for today's lesson." I turned and walked into my house without looking back. Behind me, the old engine started up and drove off, pathetic in the rain. I pulled out my phone, opened the rideshare app, and rated the trip. 1 star. With the comment, "Driver talked too much about his personal life. Unprofessional. Needs to relearn how to respect women." 3 hard lessons from my story. Financial independence is the only shield. Never, ever believe the promise of, "Stay home, I'll provide." When you don't have money in your hands, you don't have a voice. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy freedom and the power to choose when a marriage falls apart. Never underestimate the quiet one. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The truly dangerous person is the one who watches, listens, and quietly gathers evidence. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Self-respect is the most expensive thing. Don't trade your career and dreams to satisfy someone else's ego. If someone loves you, they'll support your success, not feel threatened by it. Thank you for following my sweet revenge journey. If you felt satisfied watching Mark take that $100 bill, hit like right now. And most importantly, comment the phrase "justice served" below so the YouTube algorithm pushes this story to women who need a wake-up call. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next drama stories. See you next time.